Picture the hardest military training you've ever heard of. Navy SEAL Hell Week. 5.5 days. Sleep deprivation, cold water immersion, constant physical stress, minimal food. Grown men, the strongest men their country can find, break down crying in the surf. Roughly 75% of them quit. Now stretch that week into a year, then stretch the year into a lifetime. Take away the graduation ceremony at the end. Take away the pride. Take away the trident pin and the applause. Add a rule that you can never speak unless it's absolutely necessary. Add a rule that you eat one real meal a day for half the year. Add a rule that you'll be woken at 2 a.m, every morning, for the rest of your life, to stand in an unheated stone building in December and sing for 2 hours in the dark. That's a Cistercian monastery in the 12th century. That's not a punishment. That's the schedule. That's what these men volunteered for, walked days across moorland to beg for, wept with gratitude when they were finally allowed to join. Modern special forces train for 72 hours of cold, hunger, and sleep deprivation and call it the crucible. Medieval monks did it for 40 years and called it Tuesday. Actually, they didn't call it anything. Naming your suffering would have been a kind of pride, and pride was the one luxury the house absolutely did not stock. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists admiring the ruins, the way people do now, standing in the roofless nave taking photographs of the sky. We're living it. One winter, one man, inside the walls. Everything he would have felt, smelled, heard and endured. The cold in his knuckles, the hunger behind his ribs, the bell that owns his body more completely than any drill sergeant has ever owned a recruit. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I still have no idea whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just quietly fascinated by men who considered a second blanket a moral failure. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Preferably somewhere warm, because where we're going, warmth is about to become a theological problem. Here we go. The bell finds you in the dark. You don't wake up so much as get pulled up, hauled out of sleep by the rope of that sound, because after 8 months in this house your body has stopped waiting for your mind's permission. The bell rings, the body rises. That's the whole transaction. Your mind is still somewhere else, still in the dream you are having. Something about bread. It's almost always about bread, and by the time it catches up with you, you're already sitting on the edge of a straw pallet in a room, the temperature of a root cellar, and your feet are already searching the darkness for your shoes. It is somewhere past 2 o'clock in the morning. It is the 18th of December, in the year of our Lord 1147. You're in the novices' dormitory of the Abbey of Rievaulx, in a narrow valley in the north of Yorkshire, and outside the shuttered windows the frost is thick enough to fur the stones like the pelt of an animal. The cold is not a condition here. The cold is a presence. It has weight. It lies on your chest all night like a second blanket made of iron, and when you sit up it slides down into your lap and pools around your bare ankles. Your breath comes out of you as smoke. Around you, in the long dark room, 11 other young men are producing the same smoke. 11 other columns of breath rising toward the rafters, and the only sounds are the rustle of straw, the creak of cold leather being forced onto cold feet, and one novice, the boy from Pickering, coughing the wet, tearing cough he's had since Martinmas. Nobody speaks. Nobody will speak. Nobody. Speech died in this room at nightfall, the way it dies every nightfall, and it will not be resurrected until after the morning chapter, and even then only in the places where speech is permitted, which are few, and only about the things speech is permitted for, which are fewer. Your name is Edwin. Edwin of Helmsley, though nobody has called you that in 8 months, because here you are simply Brother Edwin, or more often nothing at all, a hooded shape in a row of hooded shapes. You are 17 years old. You are the third son of a man who holds 2 ox gangs of ploughland from the Lord of Helmsley Castle, which means your eldest brother got the land, your second brother got the plough team and a place, and you got a blessing, a spare pair of shoes, and a 4-mile walk down the valley to the gates of the Abbey. That was in April. It's December now. And you have learned things since April that you didn't know a human body could learn. You've learned that you can stand for 2 hours in the middle of the night with your knees locked against the cold and not fall down. You've learned that hunger has stages, like a road has milestones, and that you can walk a long way past the milestone where you thought you'd have to stop. You've learned to sleep in your clothes, wake in your clothes, work in your clothes, and be buried, when the time comes, in your clothes, because the habit you were given at your clothing ceremony is the last garment you will ever own. And own is the wrong word, because you own nothing. Not the shoes you're lacing, not the knife at your belt, not the breath smoking out of your mouth. Everything belongs to the house, including you. You stand up, your knees crack like green wood in a fire. The floorboards flex, ice cold through the soles of your shoes, and you fall into line behind the others, 12 shapes moving through the black toward the night stair, and somewhere below you, through the floor, you can hear the great church breathing. That's what it sounds like. A vast cold lung of stone waiting to be filled. The bell rings again, closer now, and you go down to feed it. The night stair is the spine of your life now. A straight run of stone steps leading from the dormitory down into the south transept of the church, worn already, after only a few decades, into shallow cups by the passage of feet. You go down it with one hand trailing the wall, because there is no light, or almost none. A single lamp burns somewhere below, and its glow comes up the stairwell the colour of weak broth, just enough to turn the darkness from absolute into merely total. Here is something they don't tell you before you join. Monks spend an enormous portion of their lives in the dark. Not candlelit, storybook dark, actual dark. The rule permits a light to burn in the dormitory through the night, and lamps burn in the church at the offices, but a lamp in a building the size of this church is a firefly in a cave. You have learned to move through this place the way a blind man moves through his own house, by memory in the muscles, counting steps, knowing where the pillar comes, where the step drops, where Brother Anselm's stall juts a hand's breadth further into the aisle than the others. You reach the bottom of the stair and the church opens around you and the temperature drops again. You wouldn't think it could. You'd think a building couldn't be colder than the winter night outside it. But stone has its own arithmetic. These walls have been drinking cold since October. They've stored it, banked it, and now they pay it back out with interest. All night, every night, a dry mineral cold that doesn't bite the way wind bites, but instead seeps, patient and total, up through your feet, through the 2 layers of wool you're wearing, into the joints of your fingers and the sockets of your teeth. The Church of Rievaulx is not finished. It will never really be finished in your lifetime. Great churches are like that. They outlive their builders the way rivers outlive fish. But the eastern arm stands and the crossing, and the nave marches away westward into scaffolded darkness, bay after bay of it plain and vast. There is no paint on these walls. That's deliberate. No gold, no coloured glass, no carved monsters grinning from the capitals. The men who founded this order looked at the great churches of their age, blazing with colour and treasure, and decided that all of it, every gilded angel, was a distraction, a sweetness that rotted the soul's teeth. So they built in bare stone and glazed their windows in plain grey-white glass, and at night, at vigils, the whole enormous building is simply shapes of black against deeper black, with one lamp burning by the choir like a red star that has fallen indoors. You file into the choir stalls. The novices stand at the western end, furthest from the altar, nearest the cold draught from the unfinished nave, which nobody has ever suggested is a coincidence. You find your place. Wood, at least, is kinder than stone. The stall floor is boarded, and the misericord, the little ledge on the underside of the folding seat, waits for the parts of the office when you're allowed to half lean, half sit, taking the weight off knees that stopped feeling like your own about an hour into every winter vigils. Across the choir, the professed monks are filing in from their own dormitory, 40 of them, 60 more, hoods up, hands hidden in sleeves, utterly silent, and beyond them, in the western reaches of the nave, you can hear rather than see the lay brothers gathering, the conversi, the men in the brown-grey habits who do the heaviest labour of the house and stand at their own offices, shorter, simpler, in their own part of the church. There are more of them than there are of you. Rievaulx at this hour holds perhaps 140 men, all awake, all silent, all standing in the frozen dark of the smallest hours because a man in Italy 600 years ago wrote in a rule that at the 7th hour of the night the brothers shall rise for the work of God. 600 years. That's not an exaggeration for effect. Benedict of Nursia wrote his rule around the year 540. It is now 1147. Men have been getting out of bed to this schedule for 6 centuries, and they will keep getting out of bed to it for centuries after your bones have gone into the cemetery east of the church. Your grandfather's grandfather's grandfather could have stood a night office, and the psalms he sang would be the same psalms you're about to sing, in the same order, in the same language, at the same black hour. The rule doesn't change. The rule is the one fixed star in a world where kings die, harvests fail, and this very year, this exact December, England is tearing itself apart in a civil war so anarchic that men are writing in their chronicles that Christ and his saints slept. Christ and his saints may sleep. You don't. A single wooden knock sounds from the abbot's stall. The whole church rises, 140 bodies moving as one body, and out of the darkness a lone voice, thin and precise, lifts the opening verse. Domine, labia mea aperis. Lord, open my lips. And the whole choir answers, and the sound is like nothing else you have ever heard or will ever hear, because 140 men chanting in unison in a cold stone church do not sound like 140 men. The stone takes the voices and folds them together and hangs them in the air, and the sound seems to come from the building itself, from the pillars and the vault, as if the church were a huge instrument and the monks merely the breath moving through it. Etos meum annuntiabit laudem tuum, and my mouth shall declare your praise. Vigils in winter is the longest office of the day. On an ordinary night it runs perhaps an hour and a half. Tonight, in the depth of Advent, with the long lessons, it will run past 2 hours. 2 hours of standing, bowing, chanting, psalm after psalm after psalm. The monks sing the entire Psalter, all 150 psalms, every single week after week, year after year, and a monk of 30 years' profession has therefore sung each psalm more than 1,500 times, has sung the whole book of psalms through the equivalent of once for every day of 4 years of his life. and could recite any verse of it the way you could recite your own name. You cannot. Not yet. You came here in April knowing your prayers, not one word of Latin beyond them, and the novice master has been driving the psalter into you syllable by syllable ever since, the way a smith drives a nail, and about a third of it now lives in your memory. For the rest, you shape your mouth around the sounds a half beat behind the others, ride in the current of their voices, and you have discovered that this is possible, that a man can sing words he barely understands in the middle of the night through chattering teeth, and that something in the doing of it, in the endless rising and falling of the tones, works on the mind like a hand smoothing rumpled cloth. But do not mistake this for peace. This is combat. Here is the enemy. Sleep. Not the gentle sleep of your own bed, but sleep as an ambush, sleep as a wrestler. You've been awake since 2. You went to bed a little after 6 in the evening, so you've had, at best, 7 broken hours, and this is a good night. In summer, when the nights shorten, you'll have less. Around the second nocturne, somewhere in the long, slow lessons read aloud from the lectern by a single voice while everyone else stands listening in the dark, sleep comes for you. It starts in the eyes. The lids gain weight, actual physical weight, as if small coins were being laid on them one by one. Then the knees soften. Then the chant, which a moment ago was words, becomes a warm grey river, and the river is carrying you somewhere, and the somewhere is soft, and... the lantern. There is a monk whose entire job during the night office is to walk. He is called the circator, the circler, and he moves slowly along the ranks of stalls carrying a small horn lantern, and when he finds a brother asleep on his feet, he does not shake him or hiss at him. He simply stops and holds the lantern up to the sleeping man's face and waits. The light through your eyelids is like a word spoken directly into your skull. You snap awake, and there is the lantern, and behind it the shadowed face of old brother Godric, who has done this walk for 11 years and has seen every young man in the house fall asleep, and does not judge you exactly, but does not move on either, until you have taken the lantern from his hands. Because that's the rule. The man found sleeping takes the lantern and becomes the circler, and walks the ranks himself until he finds the next sleeper and hands the burden on. It is a discipline of genius when you think about it, which you have at length, because vigils gives a man a great deal of time to think. There is no shouting, no sergeant screaming in your face, just a light, a silence, and a walk, and the cold knowledge that your weakness is now the instrument that will discover someone else's. Nothing in your life before this house ever made you feel responsibility the way that lantern handle does, worn smooth by the grip of generations of the briefly ashamed. Tonight, you don't sleep. Tonight the cold does the circuitor's work for him, because tonight is cold in a way that has a taste, metallic, like sucking on a knife blade, and the boy from Pickering 2 stalls down is coughing into his sleeve in wet, ragged strokes, trying to muffle it, and the sound keeps you anchored. You stand. You bow at the doxologies, a deep bow, hands on knees, 60, 70 times a night, so that the small of your back has developed a dull, permanent ember of ache that you have stopped noticing except when it flares. You sing. Your breath, and the breath of 140 men rises into the black vault and freezes there, presumably, adding itself molecule by molecule to the fabric of the church. And here is the strange thing, the thing you could never have explained to your brothers back in Helmsley, who think you have buried yourself alive. Somewhere in the second hour on the good nights something happens. The tiredness and the cold and the hunger stop being 3 separate miseries and merge into a single sensation, and that sensation thins, like mist thinning, and behind it there is a stillness that is not empty. The psalms go on rising and falling, out of the ancient words sung in the dark by men who have renounced everything, at an hour when every other soul in England lies unconscious. Something looks back at you. You wouldn't dare call it God. The novice master would cuff you for presumption. But it is there, and it is why they do this. All of it, the cold and the hunger and the bell at 2 a.m. The hardship is not the point. The hardship is the door frame. You cannot say what the door opens onto. You have only stood on the threshold twice, maybe 3 times, for a few seconds each, in 8 months. Men stay 40 years for those seconds. The last psalm ends. The Te Deum rises, the great hymn, and the church seems to lean into it. And then it is over, and the knock sounds, and 140 men bow toward the altar and file out of the choir in perfect silence. And it is somewhere around 4:30 a.m, and you are permitted now to go back to bed. For a while. The second sleep of a winter night is the sweetest thing this house allows you, and it is roughly 2 hours long. You climb the night stair with your legs made of wet rope, and you lie down on the straw pallet fully clothed, because you are always fully clothed. The rule directs that monks sleep clothed and girded, so as to be ready without delay when the signal is given, and you learn quickly that this is less about readiness and more about survival, because a man who undressed in this dormitory in December would be committing a slow form of self-harm. You pull the single blanket to your chin. You have exactly enough time to notice the deep, spreading ache in your knees and lower back, the way it blooms when you finally take the weight off it, like a bruise being pressed, and then sleep takes you the way a trapdoor takes a man, instantly and without negotiation. And then the bell again. It is around 7, and the world outside the shutters has turned from black to the dark grey of wet slate, and you rise for lauds, the office of dawn, and you do the stair again, and the choir again, and the cold again, which has not softened 1 degree, and you sing the morning psalms while the windows of the church slowly become visible, tall pale ghosts resolving out of the darkness one by one, grey glass filling with grey light. Laudate Dominum de Caelis. Praise the Lord from the heavens. On the word laudate your breath flags out in front of you and drifts sideways through the lamplight, and around you 140 other praises are doing the same, and for a moment the choir is full of small silver banners. After lauds in the thin light comes washing. This happens at the lavatorium, a long trough of running water in the cloister walk near the refectory door, fed by a lead pipe from the conduit up the hillside. And here is a fact that would astonish your family in Helmsley. This monastery has better plumbing than the King of England. Running water, piped in, distributed to the kitchen, the laundry, the infirmary, the washing places, and flushed out through stone-lined drains that carry the waste of 140 men away down the valley. Your father washes in a bucket when he washes at all. The monks of Rievaulx wash in running water every morning of their lives, except that the water this morning has to be persuaded. The trough has a lid of ice on it the thickness of your thumb, and the first monk to reach it, Big Brother Walter, who was a smith before he was a monk and still has the forearms, breaks it with one blow of his fist, a flat crack like a branch snapping, and the brothers wash in file, quickly, 2 hands the face no more. The water is so cold it doesn't feel like water, it feels like light. It hits your face, and for 1 instant your whole skull rings like the bell, and then your skin tightens and burns, and you dry yourself on the common towel, rough as sacking, and your face goes on burning pleasantly for a quarter of an hour afterward, which is, you have realised, the closest thing to warmth the morning is going to offer, and you have caught yourself looking forward to it, which tells you something about where the baseline of your life has moved. Your hands are worth looking at in this light. Go on, look at them. In April they were a boy's hands, farm-roughened but young. 8 months of this house have rebuilt them. The knuckles are enlarged and the skin across them is cracked in fine dry lines, like the glaze of old pottery, and 2 of the cracks on the right hand have opened deep enough to show red and will not close now until spring. There is a permanent grey callus along the inside of the right middle finger where the pen rides, and a different callus, yellow and broad, across both palms from the hafts of tools. The nails are cut to the quick, all of them, because the rules keepers consider fingernails a vanity, and around the nail beds the winter has raised little painful ridges. When you wake at 2, the hands are the last part of you to come to life. You flex them on the way down the night stair, working the stiffness out finger by finger, a small private ritual hidden in your sleeves, and by the first psalm they are usually yours again. This is what people misunderstand later about medieval monks. They imagine the suffering as dramatic. Hair shirts, scourges, spectacular fasts, and that theatre existed in some houses among some men. But the true asceticism, the one that actually forged these communities, was not dramatic at all. It was cumulative. It was the cold every day, the broken sleep every night, the hunger every afternoon, the silence every hour, the standing, the bowing, the kneeling on stone, the same psalms, the same walls, the same faces for decades. No single day of it would break a healthy man. That's the point. It isn't designed to break you. It is designed to wear you, the way water wears a stone, slowly, until every softness, every self-indulgence, every corner of the personality where a man hides from himself has been ground away, and what's left is something smooth and simple and very, very hard. Special Forces selection does this to a man in weeks and calls the result a soldier. The rule does it over a lifetime and calls the result a soul. After the washing in these dark months comes a mercy, the warming house. It is the one room in the entire monastery apart from the kitchen and the infirmary where a fire is permitted to burn. One room for 140 men, and even here the mercy is rationed, because you do not simply go and enjoy the fire. That would be pleasure, and pleasure is not the purpose. You are permitted to enter, briefly, to soften the grease for your shoes, or to warm your hands enough to hold a pen, and then you are expected to leave. The fire itself is enormous, a whole tree's worth of logs in an arched fireplace, and the room around it is dim and crowded and smells of wet wool steaming, of leather grease, of smoke, and of men, and you stand in it for the space of perhaps 50 heartbeats, holding your cracked hands out to the blaze, feeling the heat move into the meat of your palms like something being poured, and it is so good that it frightens you a little, which is exactly why the novice master says you should not linger, and you don't. You turn, while every animal instinct in your body screams at you to stay, and you walk back out into the cloister where the air hits you like a slammed door. The cloister at 7:30 on a December morning. Hold this picture. A square of open grass, white and stiff with frost, surrounded on 4 sides by a covered walk, and the walk is where the life of the monastery actually happens. It is corridor, study hall and meeting place all at once, and it is open to the weather along its whole inner side, just arches and air, so that in winter The wind moves through it freely, and the monks who sit reading in its carols sit in what is functionally the outdoors, wrapped in their cowls, with their breath smoking over the pages. On the north walk nearest the church wall, which blocks the worst wind, the older monks have their reading places. Sound carries strangely under the vault. A cough at one corner arrives at the opposite corner dry and close as if coughed beside your ear. Footsteps are the loudest ordinary event of the day, and everywhere, always, underneath everything, there is the sound you stopped hearing weeks ago, and now cannot imagine living without. The river, the Rye, running its winter volume along the valley floor a stone's throw from the walls, a constant soft roar, the pulse of the place, the sound the silence is made of. At about 8 o'clock, after the morning mass, the bell calls the community into the chapter house, and this is the 1 hour of the day when the silence is formally lifted, and you have learned to dread it more than the cold. The chapter house at Rievaulx opens off the east walk of the cloister. A fine room, one of the few in the Abbey with any architectural swagger to it, and the monks sit on stone benches around its walls in order of seniority, which means you, a novice of 8 months, sit by the door where the draught lives. The abbot presides. A chapter of the rule is read aloud, that's why the room is called what it's called, and the business of the house is dealt with, work assigned, news given, and this December the news is often war news, carried up the valley by carters and beggars, the anarchy grinding on in the south, King Stephen and the Empress Matilda tearing the country between them like 2 dogs with one cloth, castles going up without license, and men doing things in those castles, the chroniclers say, that make the pen falter. The valley has been spared so far. Everyone in this room knows that so far is a phrase with an edge on it. And then comes the part of the meeting called the chapter of faults. It works like this. Any brother who has broken the rule during the past day, dropped a bowl, slept through the bell, spoken in the daughter, sung his psalm carelessly, come late to the office, rises from his bench, walks to the centre of the room, and prostrates himself on the floor, face down on the stone, and accuses himself out loud before the whole community. And any brother who has witnessed a fault in another may rise and proclaim it, and this is not considered informing, it is considered a duty of love, because to let your brother's fault go unnamed is to let the rot spread in him unchecked. Try to imagine this in any other institution on earth. 100 grown men, daily, publicly confessing that they spilled the beer or nodded off or walked too fast and lying on the floor to await their sentence. It should be absurd. Somehow in this room it is not. The abbot's sentences are usually small, extra psalms, a meal taken sitting on the floor of the refectory instead of at the table, a day of deeper silence. For graver faults there are graver answers, and yes, that includes the rod, laid on across the shoulders while the community sits and watches, and you have seen it done twice since April, and both times the strangest part was the quiet. No anger anywhere in the room, the blows falling with a flat leather sound, the abbot's face grave and almost sorrowful, and afterward the punished man kissing the floor and returning to his bench, and everyone simply continuing, the way a field continues after rain. This morning it is you. You knew it was coming. Yesterday at the office of none you came in late, not scandalously late, half a psalm late because you had been sent to the fish ponds with a message for the keeper and misjudged the walk back, and a monk who enters the choir after the glory of the first psalm is, by the rule's own words, to take a place apart that all may see him and to make satisfaction. Being seen was yesterday. Satisfaction is now. So when the abbot's glance moves around the room, you rise. Your heart is doing something undignified against your ribs. 8 paces to the centre of the chapter house, and every one of those paces is watched by 140 pairs of eyes, and worse, by the memory of every man in the room who has walked them before you, which is every man in the room. You kneel. You lower yourself onto the stone, which sends its cold up through your habit instantly, palms flat, face down, and you say, into the floor, in the formula you were taught, that you accuse yourself of coming late to the work of God, and you ask for penance. Silence. The stone smells of dust and cold and the faint sweetness of the rushes strewn near the abbot's seat. You can hear the river. Then the abbot's voice, and here you must understand something about the man the voice belongs to, because he is one reason this house, out of all the houses in England, is worth being a novice in. The abbot of Rievaulx, elected this very year, is a man named Aelred. He is 37 years old. Before he was a monk, he was a courtier, steward at the court of the King of Scots, a man headed for a bishopric and a comfortable life, and he walked away from it at 24 and presented himself at this gate, and he has since become the most famous friend in England. That is not a figure of speech. Aelred has been writing works on the nature of love and friendship, arguing in an age of iron that friendship between men is not a weakness to be burned out of a soul, but a ladder set up toward God, that Christ himself makes the third in any true friendship. The brothers say that when he was novice master he never turned a man away, that he takes in the ones other houses reject, the weak, the difficult, the broken, and that he says a monastery should be a mother, not a fortress. Under the man who ruled before him, this house was strong. Under Aelred it is becoming enormous, because word has gone out along the roads of England that at Rievaulx there is mercy inside the discipline, and men are walking in from everywhere. Mercy inside the discipline. You're lying face down on its floor about to find out the proportions. He gives you 3 psalms to be said kneeling before Compline, and a reminder, delivered to the whole room over your prostrate body, in that light, unhurried voice, that punctuality is not obedience to a bell but courtesy to God, who keeps the appointment even when we do not. And then, as you rise, he looks at you, briefly, directly, and there is nothing in the look except a kind of attention, as if for that half second you were the only novice in Yorkshire, and he says quietly that a man who is late because he was doing the house's business is a better problem than a man who is early because he was doing nothing. A ripple, not quite laughter. Laughter is for nowhere, but its ghost moves around the benches. You go back to your seat by the door with your face hot in the cold room, and the meeting moves on, and you sit there holding that half second of attention like a coal carried in a shell, and you understand, suddenly and completely, why 140 men do what this house asks of them. It is not fear. The rod is real, but the rod builds nothing. It is that a certain kind of man, given a father worth obeying, will walk into any cold you point him at. The chapter ends. The community rises. And now, until the office of terce, comes the time of work. And in December, in a valley economy running on sheep and stone, work has teeth. Understand first what kind of machine you're living inside. Because Rievaulx is not whatever the paintings of later centuries suggest, a house of pale men drifting through incense. It is one of the most efficient agricultural enterprises in the north of England, possibly in Europe, and it was designed that way from the first stake in the ground. The order you belong to, the Cistercians, the white monks, grey-white really, undyed wool, dye being another vanity, was founded less than 50 years ago by men who believed the older monasteries had grown fat. Those older houses lived like lords, on rents and serfs and appropriated churches, their monks' hands soft as a bishop's. The white monks swore to live by the labour of their own hands, as the rule commanded, and to build only in the waste places, the deserts, far from towns. And when they came to this valley 13 years before your birth, in 1132, it was exactly that. A steep wooded cleft with a river in the bottom and nothing else, and they have made it into this. Church, cloister, dormitories, infirmary, guest house, mill, fish ponds, tannery, forge, orchards, and beyond the walls a spreading web of granges, outlying farms, running sheep on the moors in numbers your father couldn't count to. Wool, that is the word under everything. The white monks of Yorkshire are becoming, within your own lifetime, the finest wool producers in Christendom, and merchants are already coming from as far as Flanders and Italy to contract for the clip, whole years of it in advance, because monastic wool is graded, sorted and honest, and the sheep that grow it graze on hills that the monks got for nothing because nobody else wanted them. The poverty of the order, this is the joke history will spend 3 centuries telling. The poverty of the order is making it rich, but you will not touch most of that machine, because you are a choir novice, and the machine has other hands. This is the second thing to understand. The lay brothers, the conversi. They are monks truly, vowed men, but of a different kind. Most of them peasants who could never have learned the Latin Psalter, and the order created for them a parallel life, shorter prayers, simpler rules, no reading, and in exchange they do the great labour, the ploughing, the shepherding out on the far granges, the building, the tanning, the carting. They sleep in their own dormitory in the West Range. They stand in their own half of the church, and there are perhaps 500 of them attached to this abbey and its granges. 500 against a choir of well over 100, and when the whole family of the house gathers on a great feast, the church holds a small town. Your father, if he had come to this gate instead of sending you, would have been made a lay brother. You can read a little, and you had the psalms by ear, and so you were taken for the choir. One skill, one accident of a village priest who liked your voice, and 2 entirely different lives. You think about that sometimes, at the 2 o'clock bell when you rise to sing and the lay brothers who rose before you are already out in the dark with the beasts. Choir monks work too, though. The rule is explicit. Idleness is the enemy of the soul, and between chapter and the midday office the community scatters to its tasks. And in December the tasks are these: threshing in the great barn, flail work which you have done, and which turns the shoulders to wood, mucking the stables and the byres, mending, copying, for those with the hand for it, and, this morning, for you and 3 other novices under the eye of Brother Walter the ex-smith carrying stone. The church, remember, is not finished. The mason's lodge stands against the north side of the nave, and though the master mason and his skilled men have mostly stopped for the winter, frost being the enemy of fresh mortar, the work of supply never stops, because stone must be moved from the river landing to the lodge, and sand and lime and timber for the scaffolds, so that when the light comes back in March the building can leap forward. The stone comes from quarries up the valley, some of it floated down on a canal. The monks dug themselves, monks, digging a canal to move their church past the awkward bends of the river, and it arrives in rough blocks, and this morning there is a sled of them at the landing and 150 paces of frozen ground between the sled and the lodge, and you are the engine. Here is what a block of sandstone the size of a bread oven teaches you. It teaches you that weight is a language. You get your fingers under the lifting bar, 2 novices to a bar, and you take the strain, and the block tells you, instantly and without sympathy, exactly what you are worth this morning. The bar bites into palms that are cracked already. The cold has made the iron sticky against skin, and you learned in November the hard way, watching a lay brother peel his palm off a frozen chain and leave some of it behind to keep your mitts on, thick, greasy wool, clumsy as hooves. You lift with the legs, Walter's one sermon, delivered daily. The back is for keeping straight, the legs are for lifting, and you walk the burden across ground frozen into ridges that turn underfoot like loose cobbles, and your breath soars in and out, and the muscles along your forearms begin, at about the 10th trip, to burn with a deep, steady heat. That is, you notice with something like black amusement, the warmest part of your entire day. By the 15th trip, your hands have moved through pain into a buzzing numbness. By the 20th, the small of your back has joined the conversation. You develop, as all labourers develop, the arithmetic of endurance. Don't count the sled, never count the whole sled, count to the next rest, count the paces, 41, 42, the lodge doorway, down, straighten, breathe, back. The sky over the valley is the colour of undyed wool. Ravens are working the ploughland across the river, big, deliberate birds, and their calls come across the water flat and hard like planks dropped. Somewhere behind the west range a lay brother is splitting logs, and the sound arrives a half beat after the visible fall of the axe wok, and the delay never stops being strange. And at some point in the middle of it, hauling stone for a church you will never see finished, breath smoking, palms screaming inside the wool, you catch yourself doing the thing the novice master warned you about, the thing he called the murmur. The murmur is the voice, everyone has it, that says, this is pointless, this is madness, you could be warm somewhere, other men your age are warm somewhere, eating fat bacon and talking to girls, and you are hauling rocks in a frozen ditch for no wage at all, for less than no wage, for the privilege of being woken at 2. The novice master, Brother Morris, does not tell you to silence the murmur. This surprised you. He is a dry, narrow old man, with a face like a hatchet and 30 years of profession behind him. And what he said back in the autumn, when you finally confessed the murmur to him, was this: of course it is pointless. Look at it with the eyes of the world, and it is entirely pointless, cold and hunger and rocks. The world is not wrong about the facts. The world is wrong about what a man is for. And he told you that every monk in the choir, every one, including the abbot, hears the murmur, some of them every day of 40 years, and that holiness is not the absence of the voice. It is the 10,000 mornings of picking up the stone anyway. Then he told you to stop feeling special about your suffering, because feeling special about your suffering is just pride wearing a sad face. And he assigned you the 7 penitential psalms and walked off. You pick up the stone anyway. 41 paces, 42, the lodge doorway, down. The bell rings for terce, and you are, of course, not late. Now we need to talk about hunger, because hunger is the 3rd pillar of this life, after cold and broken sleep, and of the 3 it is the one you were least prepared for, because you grew up poor and thought you knew it. You did not know it. You knew shortage, which is hunger with an end in sight, the lean weeks before harvest, thin porridge and thinner tempers, and then the grain comes in and everyone eats. What the monastery practices is different. It is hunger by design, hunger as a permanent architecture, calibrated, deliberate, and endless. Here is the winter schedule. From the middle of September until Lent, the community eats one meal a day. 1. It is taken in the middle of the afternoon, after the office of nun, which means that between rising at 2 in the morning and that meal, you will have stood 3 offices, sat a chapter, hauled stone for 3 hours, and studied on a stomach containing exactly nothing. In Lent it gets harder still, the meal pushed back to evening. Only in the high summer, when the fieldwork is heaviest, does the rule relent and grant 2 meals, dinner and a light supper, and even then the portions would make a ploughman laugh or weep. And here is what is never on the table, not in winter, not in summer, not ever, unless you're dying in the infirmary. Meat. The flesh of 4-footed animals is forbidden to the healthy, not rationed, forbidden. The Abbey runs thousands of sheep, and you will go your whole professed life without tasting mutton. What there is bread, a generous pound of it a day, coarse, dense, honest bread, and 2 cooked dishes, which in December means what the garden and the storerooms mean. Pottage of beans, pottage of cabbage and leeks, oat gruel, sometimes eggs, sometimes cheese, on feast days fish from the Abbey's own ponds, bream and pike and eels, and to drink ale, weak, cloudy household ale, safer than water and about as intoxicating as rain. That's the diet. Roughly what a modern dietitian would call adequate and a modern soldier would call a fast. And your body, month by month, has been renegotiating its relationship with it. The first weeks were the worst back in the spring. The hunger then was loud, a fist opening and closing behind your navel, and it argued with you all day, and it got into the offices so that you would be singing of the mercies of the Lord and thinking, with total sincerity, about bacon. Brother Morris, who misses nothing, watched you sway one afternoon and told you that the stomach is the most honest of the appetites, and therefore the first one the rule takes in hand, because a man who cannot govern his dinner will never govern anything subtler. By midsummer the fist had stopped clenching and become a flat, quiet pressure. By now December it has become something almost abstract, a lightness, a faint ringing at the edges of things, and you have learned its stages the way a sailor learns weather. There is the hollow hour, mid-morning, when the stone-hauling burns through whatever is left of yesterday, and the body sends up its formal complaint. There is the grey hour, after sext, when thought slows and the Latin swims and you read the same line of the Psalter 4 times. And then, strangely, past the grey hour, there is a clearing, an odd cold clarity, the mind sharpening as the body gives up lobbying, and the old monks say that this is the whole secret, that fasting was never about despising the body, it was about quieting it, the way you quiet a room to hear something faint. Then none ends, and the community processes to the refectory, and faint things can wait, because it is time at last to eat. The refectory at Rievaulx is a great hall on the south side of the cloister, raised over an undercroft with the kitchen beside it, so placed that it can serve both the choir monks' hall and the lay brothers' hall from the same fires, which is the kind of practical cunning this order builds into everything. You wash your hands again at the trough, you file in, you stand at your place at the long board while the blessing is sung, and the smell of the pottage hits you somewhere around the second verse, and the discipline of standing still through the doxology while your mouth floods is a small daily martyrdom that no chronicle will ever record. You sit. And now the second architecture of the meal locks into place around the food, because no one speaks, and no one will speak, and instead, from the stone pulpit built into the wall, one brother, who ate earlier, alone, reads aloud, tonight from the conferences of Cassian, in a slow, level chant voice, and the community eats an entire meal to the sound of one voice and the click of spoons. But 140 men still have to run a dinner. Salt has to be passed. Bread has to be asked for. A jug runs empty. And so the monks have built what they are forbidden to speak, a language of the hands. It is a real codified sign language taught to you in your first weeks like a second Latin. Bread. A circle drawn with 2 thumbs and forefingers. Fish. The hand swum sideways through the air. More, fingers gathered upward. The signs are supposed to be minimal, functional, and of course, monks being men, they are not. There are jokes in sign. Whole silent comedies run up and down the novice's end of the table when Morris is looking elsewhere. And the sign for the cellarer, who is fat, is not the official sign for the cellarer. And one day in the autumn, the boy from Pickering made it at exactly the wrong moment, and got 3 days of bread and water for laughter at table. Laughter, out loud, in the refectory, which shocked the hall like a dropped platter. The food itself. Let's be exact. Because you are, about this subject, exact. A wooden bowl of bean pottage, thick enough to hold the spoon upright for a moment before it keels, flavoured with leeks and a little salt, and, tonight, a background note of smoked fish stock that someone in the kitchen has coaxed out of eel bones. A second dish, cabbage stewed soft. Your pound of bread, dark, close-grained, with a crust that cracks like thin ice, and a sour, deep wheat and rye taste that you privately believe you will remember on your deathbed. A wedge of hard cheese. Ale. You eat slowly. Everyone eats slowly. This took you months to learn because hunger wants to bolt, and bolting is animal, and the whole art of this room is to take exactly what the body needs, with none of the theatre of appetite. You break the bread rather than bite it. You spoon the pottage at the pace of the reading. The warmth of it goes down into you and spreads out from the centre. Actual warmth, the first since the warming house fire this morning, and for about a quarter of an hour the whole day makes a different kind of sense, and Cassian's words float over the hall. Something about the restless heart, and the spoons click, and the river runs, and 140 of the toughest men in England sit in total silence eating beans, and not one of them, you'd wager, would trade places with the king, who is, this winter, somewhere in the wreckage of his own country, eating meat and losing everything. When it's over, the scraps are gathered for the poor at the gate. Always, every day. Because the poor at the gate are not an interruption to this house. They are one of its purposes, and this year the war has multiplied them. Ragged families drifting north out of the burned counties, and the almoner's dole of bread and pottage at the gatehouse is, for some of the people standing in that line, the entire difference between winter and death. You have served that line. You will serve it again. It changes how you eat. Then the community rises, sings its thanks, and files out, and the day tilts toward evening, and there is one more room to show you before the dark comes down, and it is the room where this house is quietly doing the thing it will be remembered for 1,000 years after the sheep are forgotten. There is no grand scriptorium at Rievaulx, no special hall of writing. The white monks write where they read, in the north walk of the cloister, in shallow bays against the church wall, and in an alcove near the chapter house where the book cupboard stands, and calling it a book cupboard undersells what it is, because inside that armoured recess of stone and oak lives most of the recorded thought available to this corner of the world. Perhaps 100 volumes, perhaps 150, the scriptures, in parts. Augustine, Gregory, Cassian, Bede, the local saint of learning, who worked 70 miles north of here in another age. Some Cicero, some Ovid, kept slightly guiltily. Every one of them copied by hand, because there is no other way for a book to exist, and a single large volume represents the skins of an entire flock of calves and a year of a man's eyesight. You write in the afternoons now, 3 days in the week, because Brother Maris looked at your letters in the autumn, grunted, which from Maris is a citation for valour, and put you to learning the house's hand under Brother Serlo, the precentor's assistant, who has copied books for 20 years, and whose right shoulder sits visibly lower than his left. Here is what the work is, stripped of the romance. You sit on a bench in an unheated stone gallery in December at a sloped desk, and on the desk is a gathering of parchment, and parchment is skin, calf skin, scraped, limed, stretched and pumiced, and in cold weather it remembers that it was once an animal. It stiffens, it cockles, it fights the pen. Your inkhorn sits in a bored hole at the desk's edge, and the ink is oak gall ink, brewed black from crushed galls and iron salts and rainwater. And on a morning like this it thickens to sludge, and must be carried to the warming house and coaxed back to life like a fainting bird. Your pen is a goose quill, cut by your own knife, and it needs recutting every page or two, and the little curled shavings collect in the desk trough with the parchment crumbs and the pumice dust. Your left hand holds the knife always, always, partly to steady the springy parchment, partly to scrape away, instantly, the letter you get wrong, because there is no crossing out in a book that must outlive you. And your hands are cold. This is the whole war in the winter months. Not skill against ignorance, blood against stone. A scribe's line is a fine motor act, the whole letter formed from the fingers, and fingers are the first things winter confiscates. You write until the strokes begin to wobble, until the minims of an ennui start to splay like a collapsing fence, and then you stop and breathe into your fists and work your fingers inside your sleeves, and some of the older scribes have hollow balls of brass, or a smooth stone kept warm at the kitchen and carried to the desk, hand warmers, cradled between lines, and you have a beach pebble from the river doing the same office, and it works for about as long as a small kindness works anywhere, and then the stone is cold again, and so are you. In the margins of books from houses like this one, real books, surviving books, monks left small cries in Latin and Irish and English that historians will read 8 centuries from now. Thin ink, bad parchment. My hand is weary with writing. The candle burns badly. Oh, my breast, Holy Virgin, it is cold today. Only the beginning of a scribe knows what the end of a book costs. You are copying, this month, a psalter, of all things, the very book you are simultaneously being made to memorize, so that the words go in through the ear at 2 in the morning and out through the hand at 2 in the afternoon, and somewhere in the crossing of those 2 roads they are becoming part of your permanent architecture. Today's page is the 102nd Psalm, and you have just laid down, in careful black minuscule, the line about the pelican of the wilderness and the owl among ruins, watching, and I am become like a sparrow, alone upon the housetop, and you stop, pen lifted, because the cloister is grey, and the frost is on the garth, and somewhere a single bird actually is scolding from the church gutter. and for a moment the 800-year-old line and the afternoon lie perfectly on top of each other, like a seal in wax. This is the secret pleasure of the work, the one nobody warned you about. Copying sounds like drudgery, and it is drudgery. 4 hours for a good page, 20 lines to the page, every letter a built thing, and the shoulder aching, and the eyes, in the failing light, beginning to slide. But it's also the slowest possible way of reading, and the slowest possible way of reading turns out to be a door. You cannot copy a sentence without living inside it for the length of its making. Scholars will one day call what monks do with texts rumination, and mean it literally, chewing the cud. The same mouthful turned over and over, and you have started to catch yourself, hauling stone or peeling roots, with a phrase from the morning's page circling in you on its own power, wearing its channel deeper. And 2 bays down the North Walk most afternoons sits the abbot. Aelred writes the way other men convalesce, rapt, hunched, utterly absorbed, and the brothers give his bay a wide berth. But sound carries in a cloister, and you have heard the mutter of him trying sentences aloud, and Serlo has copied his draft and says, in sign, with an eloquence that sign should not permit, that the abbot's Latin is like water running downhill. The book he made as novice master, The Mirror of Charity, is in the cupboard already. The brothers read it at collation. The one they say he turns over now and will write in the years ahead is stranger and warmer. A book on spiritual friendship, set out as conversations between himself and his own monks, real monks, men whose stalls you can see from yours, arguing gently in a written cloister garden about whether a monk dare love one brother more than another, and answering carefully, scandalously, yes. It begins, so Serlo says, with a sentence like a hand laid on the shoulder. Here we are, you and I hope that between us Christ makes a third. 800 years from now, in an age of machines this valley cannot dream, lonely people will still be reading that sentence. That is what the cold hands are buying, not this psalter only, though the psalter matters. The whole apparatus, the ink and the calf skins and the ruined shoulders and the freezing galleries, is a bucket line, passing fire hand to hand across a burning age. The empire that once carpeted Europe in books is 6 centuries dead. The war grinding through England this very winter burns a library as easily as a barn. More easily, parchment loves flame. Whatever survives of the old world's mind, whatever crosses from the ancients to whoever comes after, crosses because men in rooms like this one, in weather like this weather, kept writing until they could not feel the pen. The light goes early in December. By 3:30 the page has gone the colour of the sky, and Serlo signs the day's end, and you clean your pen, stopper the horn, ease your cramped hand open against your thigh, finger by finger, and the bell rings for Vespers as if it is in watching you. Vespers is the golden office, or would be, in a house that permitted itself gold. It is sung as the light dies, and even through plain grey glass a December sunset does something to a white stone church, warms it for a quarter of an hour to the colour of honey and ash, and the psalms of the evening are the gentle ones, the lamplighting psalms, and the Magnificat rises, Mary's song sung by rough male voices in a cold valley at dusk, and you have stopped being surprised that your chest aches during it. After Vespers, in the last usable light, comes collation, which is a reading, not a meal. The community gathered in the cloister or the chapter house to hear a passage from the Fathers read aloud before the day is sealed, and in winter it is brief, because everyone is standing in the cold, and then Compline, the last office, short, dark, sung half from memory with the church now fully night again, the same few psalms every single evening of every single year, deliberately, so that a monk could sing Compline dying, and many have. Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. Keep me as the apple of an eye. Hide me under the shadow of thy wings. And then the abbot sprinkles the passing brothers with holy water at the door, and the great silence comes down, and this silence is the deep one, the one that even the daytime's careful exceptions do not touch, and the community climbs to its dormitories at somewhere around 6:30 in the evening, and lies down, clothed and girded on straw. In the dark, 140 men, and the Abbey holds 140 separate silences inside one large one, and outside the river runs, and the frost tightens its grip on the valley with small ticking sounds, and 7.5 hours later, the bell will begin it all again. That is a day, one day. You have done roughly 240 of them. You will do, if you live to Morris's age, something like 15,000 more. It was on a night like this one 3 weeks ago that the boy from Pickering decided to leave, and told you, and telling you was itself a sin because it was after Compline, and he did it in the latrine passage, which is where all the contraband speech of the monastery happens, in a whisper with his mouth almost against your hood. His name in the world was Osbert. He is 16, a wool merchant's son, quick with letters, quicker than you, and he came in the summer full of the fire that sends boys to monasteries, and the fire lasted him until about the middle of November, when the cold and the cough got into him together, and the murmur the voice Morris warned of stopped murmuring in him, and began to talk out loud. "I can't," is what he whispered. That was the whole of the theology of it. "I can't." His breath was shaking. My father would take me back. He said so. He said the door at home stays open a year. I'm 16. I could be warm in a fortnight. I could be eating meat by Christmas. This is madness, Edwin. Look at us. Look at your hands. We're 17 and we have the hands of old men. And for what? Tell me honestly, standing in the dark, singing to the dark. For what? And here is the thing you have thought about every day since. You had no answer. You're not the abbot. You're not Morris. You're a ploughman's third son 8 months into a life you barely understand, and every word he said was factually true. And the murmur in your own chest rose up and agreed with him point by point, and what you finally whispered back was not an argument at all. You said, "Stay until Candlemas." That was all you could find. Not forever, until Candlemas. Because it's the dark that's talking, and you shouldn't let the dark make a decision the light has to live with. He stared at you, and then the infirmarian's step sounded in the passage, and you both fled to your pallets like thieves. He is still here. He coughs 2 stalls down from you at vigils, which is how you count him present. Whether you did him a kindness or a harm, you genuinely do not know, and Morris, when you confessed the whole conversation, faults and all, looked at you for a long moment with that hatchet face and said only, "Novices leave. 1/3 of them most years. There is no shame in the leaving. The shame would be in a house that made leaving impossible. The vow is terrible precisely because the door is open." And then he said the thing you have not been able to put down since. He said, you told him to wait for the light. Be sure, when your own night comes, and it will come, that you take your own advice. The days repeat. That is the design, and there is no varying it. And so instead of walking you through another day and another, let winter itself do what winter does, which is deepen. Christmas comes, and Christmas in a Cistercian house is not a feast of the belly but of the choir. The great night offices swell, The church burns more lamps than you have ever seen it burn, perhaps a dozen. Extravagance. And at the midnight mass the whole family of the house, choir and lay brothers together, better than 500 voices when the Grangers send their men in, stands in the one building, and the Christmas gospel is read into a darkness packed with breathing, and for the space of that night the cold is simply not interesting. There is fish at dinner, and a measure of better ale, and the abbot preaches in chapter on the child in the straw, and looks, while he says it, entirely at the novices' bench, at the row of boys sleeping on straw themselves, and Osbert beside you breathes in once sharply, as if the sentence had touched a bruise. January closes over the valley like water over a stone. The drifts stand in the cloister garth. 2 of the older monks move into the infirmary for the season, which is customary and sensible. The infirmary has fires, and the infirmarian, Brother Ralph, doses the coughing half of the community with horehound and hyssop boiled in honey, and bleeds those whose humours he judges to be winter-thickened, bloodletting being, in this age, not an emergency measure but routine maintenance. Performed several times a year on healthy monks, who are then permitted, wonder of wonders, a few days of rest, extra food, and conversation in the infirmary hall, so that the brothers, being men, have been known to look forward to being bled the way schoolboys look forward to a fair, and the rules keepers, knowing men, ration it. And the war news comes up the valley all winter like a smell. A grange of another house burned southward. Armed men on the York road, allegiance unclear. The almoner's line at the gate grows. In chapter, the abbot orders the guest house kept ready and the dole doubled through the worst weeks, and quotes the rule's flat, staggering command, the one that built 1,000 years of hospitality. Let all guests who arrive be received like Christ. All guests. The word does no sorting. On the coldest morning of January there are 19 people in the gatehouse line, and one of them is a man with a soldier's scars and no shoes whatever, his feet wrapped in hay and rags, and you serve him pottage with your cracked hands, shaking slightly, and he blesses you in an accent from no county you know, and eats like a man remembering how. It is in that same January, in the dead middle of it, that you're sent to the infirmary for the first time, and not as a patient. The cough that has been working its way through the community since Martimas finally puts 4 brothers on their backs in 1 week, and the infirmarian, Brother Ralph, asks the novice master for a pair of hands, and Morris, who believes that a novice should be lent out the way a tool is lent out, promptly and without consulting the tool, gives him you. The infirmary stands east of the cloister, connected to it by a passage but deliberately apart, its own small world with its own small rules, and stepping into it from the January cloister is like stepping into another country, because the infirmary has fires, 2 of them, burning all day, and the shock of walking out of the outdoor cold you have stopped even naming, and into actual layered ambient warmth is so physical that you stop dead on the threshold the first morning, and Ralph, without looking up from the herb bench, says, "Yes, everyone does that. Come in and shut the door before the heat escapes and takes your vocation with it." Ralph is the closest thing this house has to a physician, which is to say he is a monk with 30 years of herb lore, a shelf of medical texts he has copied himself, a set of bleeding irons kept sharper than the kitchen knives, and a bedside manner made of equal parts scripture and flint. Under his rule the infirmary hall holds this month 7 men. The 4 new coughs, 1 lay brother with a leg broken at the quarry and splinted straight as a lance, and 2 permanent residents, monks too old for the dormitory and the night stair, who live out their last years here by the fire, dispense by the rule itself from the full rigour, because the rule, you keep discovering, has a gentleness folded into its iron that nobody on the outside ever hears about. The sick are allowed meat. You knew this as a fact. Watching it is another thing. On your second morning you carry in from the kitchen a dish that stops you mid-stride with a smell your body remembers from another life. Mutton, actual mutton, stewed with barley, for the quarryman and the worst of the coughs, and the whole hall inhales as it passes, and one of the old men by the fire, Brother Godric, the same Godric of the lantern, retired now from the circuitor's walk, watches you set it down and says, dry as tinder, mind yourself, boy. More than one vocation has drowned in a bowl of that. Your work is plain. You feed the fires. You carry water, slops, broth. You hold the basin while Ralph bleeds the brothers whose turn it is, because January is a bleeding month by the calendar Ralph keeps, and you learn to watch the dark blood run down a man's forearm along the little groove of the blade wound and drip into the brass with a sound like a slow, soft bell, and to note that the monks being bled look, without exception, quietly delighted, because the bled are excused choir, fed generously, and permitted conversation for 3 days, and Ralph calls the little room where they recover the Parliament, because more talking happens in it in a week than in the cloister in a season. And in the afternoons, between tasks, you sit with Godric, because Ralph orders it. The old are to be visited, it says so in the rule, and because after the first afternoon, wild horses could not keep you away. Godric is 81 years old. Stop on that number. It is 1148. A man of 81 was born around 1067, the year after the Normans came. He remembers, with the terrible clarity the very old keep for the very early, being a child in a village north of York in the winter. The conqueror came up to punish the rebel north. The winter men still call the harrying, when the king's men burned the crops in the barns and the ploughs and the beasts from York to Durham, so that nothing would live, and famine walked the north for years after, and the survivors, Godric's people among them, ate what famine's people eat, and he will not say more than that, and you do not ask. He was 7. He walked south with his mother as far as the Ouse. He remembers the colour of the sky over the burning vales, and he tells you the colour, and you will never afterward see that shade of winter sunset without thinking of it. He came to monastic life at 40, late, at Whitby first, then here in the founding years, when Rievaulx was 12 monks in wooden huts and a river. He helped raise the first church, the small one, before this one swallowed it. He's been circuiter, cellarer's man, porter, and for 11 years the keeper of the lantern, and now he is a body by a fire with a mind like a struck flint, and he has decided, for reasons he does not explain, to spend some of his last winter on you. What he teaches you mostly is time, not the offices. You know the offices. He teaches you what stands behind them. He shows you one afternoon the instrument by which the whole house is steered through the dark, because someone you had never once thought to wonder who has to know when the 7th hour of the night arrives in a world without clocks, and wake the bell ringer who wakes the world. The sacrist keeps the night watch for this, and his tools are these: a graduated candle marked in bands lit at Compline. On clear nights, the stars themselves watch through a particular window against a particular gable, because the rule's children have known for centuries which star stands where at which hour of which month. And newly a marvel Godric describes with the suspicion he reserves for all marvels. A water device down at one of the great houses in the south, a clepsydra, that measures the hours by dripping and can be made to trip a small alarm, a thing that rings so that a man may ring the thing that rings. Monks, Godric says, will end by building a machine to pray for them. Mark me. He is joking. He is also, though neither of you can know it, prophesying, it is monks within a century and a half of this fireside who will drive the invention of the mechanical clock, because no one else on earth needs to know the hour in the dark badly enough to build iron that knows it for them, and the escapement that will one day tick in every tower and pocket and wrist of the world is being asked for right now by the problem of getting 140 men out of bed at 2 in the morning. Your whole civilization's heartbeat, listener, the tyranny and the gift of the measured hour starts here, in the sacrist's cold vigil and an old man's joke by an infirmary fire, and on your last afternoon, when the coughs have mended enough that Ralph releases you back to Morus, Godric gives you the other thing, the one you actually came for, though you didn't know it. You have been telling him, because he is the kind of listener that opens a buoy like a knife opens an oyster, about the murmur, about Osbert, about the whisper in the latrine passage and stay until Candlemas and not knowing still whether you did right. And Godric is quiet for a while, looking into the fire, his hands, which are the hands your hands will be in 60 years, lying open in his lap. Then he says, I have watched novices come through that gate for 30 years, and I will tell you the one thing I know that the books don't say. The ones who stay are not the strong ones. Strength runs out. I have seen oxen of men over the wall by Lammas, and they are not the holy ones. Holiness at 17 is mostly indigestion. The ones who stay are the ones who find, somewhere in the first winter, one thing they can love that is bigger than their own comfort. One thing. For some it is the singing. For some it is the book cupboard. For one man I knew it was the bees. It does not matter what it is, because it is only a handle, and God takes hold of a man by whatever handle the man offers. You gave your friend a handle, a date, and your own company. That is all any of us ever does for each other. Now stop asking whether it was right. Right is for judges. You are going to be a monk. A monk's question is only ever, what is the next thing love does? And then he closes his eyes, deliberately like a man closing a book, and says, the next thing love does is let an old man sleep before vespers. Go on, boy, you go on. Through the passage, back into the cold, which hits you like a wave and no longer means what it meant, you carry the fire out with you, is the thing. That's the trick the infirmary teaches, the trick the whole house runs on. You cannot stay by the fire, you can carry it. 10 days later, in the first week of February, the sky to the northeast turns the colour of a bruise at midday, and the shepherds start looking at it, and the storm that the rest of this story has been walking toward comes down off the high moor like a lid closing. Understand what sheep mean before you judge what happens next. The Abbey's flocks winter in the low pastures and folds near the granges, but hay is finite, and the winter has been long, and in a hard February the shepherds still walk the flocks out by day to whatever the moor edge offers, bent grass, heather tips, anything, and walk them back to the folds by dark. It is the oldest work in the world, and the lay brothers who do it are the toughest men in an abbey of tough men, out in all weathers in their grey-brown habits and their thick-hooded cloaks, sleeping at the granges, coming into the abbey church only on Sundays and feasts. One of them is a man called Brother Leofwine, and you know him, slightly, the way a novice knows a lay brother, which is by sight and by legend. 50 years old or more, a shepherd since childhood, converted to the habit late, after his wife died, a man who is said to know every beck and bog on the Abbey's moorland the way you know the night stair, and to have once carried 2 ewes down off the height in a gale, one under each arm, like loaves. On the 6th of February, Leofwine and a younger lay brother named Hamo take 140 ewes, heavy with lamb, up to the moor edge above the western grange, because the forecast in a world without forecasts is a shepherd's nose, and Leofwine's nose says the weather will hold till dark. It does not hold till dark. The storm comes down at about the 9th hour, and it comes the way the worst ones come here, not as a front you can watch arrive, but as an erasure. The bruise-coloured sky simply lowering itself onto the land, and the wind going from strong to insane inside a quarter of an hour, and the snow not falling but travelling horizontally in ropes and sheets. A white darkness in which a man cannot see his own outstretched arm, cannot hear his own shout, cannot, after a surprisingly short time, reliably say which way is downhill. You're in the cloister when it reaches the Abbey, and even in the valley bottom, even behind walls, it is a fist. The arcades fill with driven snow. Vespers is sung to a church roaring like the sea, the wind finding every unfinished joint in the nave and playing it, a huge mindless organ, and the lamps gutter in their glass, and the community's voices, 140 men, sound suddenly small, a thread of order run through a hurricane, which is, you think later, the most honest picture of the monastic project you will ever be shown. The word comes at the end of Vespers, brought by a grange servant who has fought his way down the valley on a borrowed horse. The flock is in, most of it. Hamo drove 90 ewes into the fold at the grange, snow-blind and frostbitten, and Hamo's news is this: on the moor edge, when the white darkness shut on them, the flock split. Leofwine turned back into the storm after the lost half. He told Hamo to take what they held and go down. That was 3 hours ago. What happens next happens fast, and it is the abbot who makes it happen, and you will remember the scene by lamplight in the cloister for the rest of your life. Elred, hood back, snow melting on his scalp, giving orders with a courtier's speed and no drama whatever. The searchers will be lay brothers and grange men, more men, a dozen of them, roped in pairs with horn lanterns, staves, and the Abbey's dogs. The infirmary is to heat water and stones and stand ready. The kitchen fires stay up all night. The choir monks will do the one thing choir monks are for. The community will keep the church in relays before the altar all night, so that at every hour of the darkness someone is awake before God with the missing man's name in his mouth. And because the searchers must be fed, and the lanterns fuelled, and messages run between the church, the kitchen, the gate, and the infirmary, a handful of the youngest and soundest are attached to the cellarer as runners, and Morris's dry hand lands on your shoulder and on Osbert's. So you spend the night of the great storm of February 1148 running. You will try, years later, to describe that night and find that memory has stored it as fragments, each one sharp as a chip of glass. The kitchen, a cave of orange light and steam, the cook's face shining, cauldrons of water and cauldrons of pottage, and the door to the yard opening every quarter hour onto a rectangle of screaming white, the weight of a yoke of buckets across your shoulders, and the way the wind hit the buckets like a living thing trying to take them from you, and the 40 paces from kitchen to gatehouse turned into a battle you had to plan, post to post, wall to wall, bent double, snow packing into your hood, your ears, the folds of your sleeves, snow with a texture you've never met before, dry as sand, stingier like thrown grit. The gatehouse itself, where the search parties mustered, huge men made huger by layered cloaks, faces already white-crusted, checking rope, and the dogs turning in tight circles, whining at the door. And the head of the searchers, a granite lay brother called Serlo the Elder, no relation to your Serlo, saying to the porter in English, in the flat voice of the Moors, "If we're not back by Lords, no one comes after us, no one. You bar this gate to heroes, and the church, all night, between errands, whenever your route crossed it, the relay of monks kneeling in the choir, 4 at a time, changing silently on the hour, the great building black and thundering, one lamp alive, and the murmur of the psalms of distress, going up continuously into the roar. Out of the depths have I cried unto thee, and you would stop in the transept for the space of 10 breaths, dripping, chest heaving, and let the sound hold you up, and then go back out into the white. Somewhere past midnight the bell begins to ring, not the office bell. The great bell, rung slow, stroke after single stroke, and it will ring like that until dawn, because a bell in a blizzard is a lighthouse made of sound, and somewhere up on that howling moor, if Leofwine is still on his feet, still burrowed into a drift with his sheep the way moor shepherds are taught from boyhood to do, that one iron note arriving downwind between gusts is the only object in the universe that can tell him where the world is. You're 17, hauling water through a hurricane at 2 in the morning for a man you barely know, while 40 monks sing psalms into a storm and a bell tolls into the dark for the lost. And here is the thing you notice, in the middle of it, with the strange clarity of exhaustion. Nobody has panicked. Nobody all night has raised their voice except to be heard over wind. The house has met the emergency the way it meets the 2nd of February and the 10th of October, with order, with relays, with everyone knowing their office and doing it. And you understand suddenly that this is what all of it was for. The bells, the discipline, the 15,000 identical days. You do not train a man for 40 years so that he can stand in a warm choir. You train him so that on the one night the roof of the world tears off, he does not. Lords comes and is sung by the relay, thin and unbroken into the storm. The searchers are not back by Lords. The porter stands at the barred gate with his lantern and does not open it, because he was told not to, and obedience is the whole spine of this place, and he stands there with his jaw working, an old man crying without noise, obeying. They come back at first light. The wind drops toward dawn the way these storms do, as if losing interest, and the snow thins to a hard bright sift, and out of it, down the white valley, comes a line of figures, and the watchman's horn sounds from the gatehouse roof, one long note, and the Abbey empties toward the gate. Rule or no rule, and you are in the crowd in the gateway when the line resolves. 11 searchers went out. 11 come back. They are carrying 40 ewes worth of story in their ruined faces, and they are carrying on a hurdle of lash staves a shape covered by a snow-stiffened cloak. They found the sheep at the 4th hour, folded, alive, 51 of them, packed into the lee of a peat hag in a hollow that only a man who knew every beck and bog would ever have found in the dark, and they were folded because someone had folded them, driven them down into the shelter and penned them with his crook and his dog and his body. The dog was still there, on top of the drift, and wouldn't leave it, and that is how the searchers knew where to dig. Leofwine had gotten the sheep into the one place on that moor where sheep could live through such a night, and then, the snow filling in behind the wind, the bell, perhaps, arriving on the gusts and perhaps not. He had sat down against the peat with his back to the storm and his dog against his chest, in the posture of a man keeping watch, and the cold, which had been trying all his life, had finally talked him to sleep. They carry him in through the gate of the abbey he served, past the porter, past the abbot, who walks out bareheaded into the falling snow to meet the hurdle, and lays his hand on the frozen cloak, and past you. And the great bell, which has been tolling all night for the lost, changes its rhythm without anyone appearing to instruct it, and begins to toll for the dead. A monastery buries its own with a completeness the outside world reserves for princes, except that here it is given to everyone, identically, choir monk and lay brother, abbot and swineherd. And this is one of the quiet revolutions of the cloister that nobody advertises. In a century built entirely out of rank, inside these walls death is a leveller with a straight blade. Rievaulx's body is washed by the brothers of the infirmary and dressed in his habit, the habit he died in, cleaned and dried, because a monk is buried in his uniform like a soldier, and he lies before the altar of the lay brothers' choir for a day and a night, and the community keeps watch over him in the same relays that prayed through the storm. The psalter said over him continuously, aloud, straight through, psalm after psalm, all 150, and then beginning again, so that from the moment he entered the church to the moment he leaves it, there is never a minute in which a human voice is not speaking over Rievaulx, the words he heard at every office of the 30 years of his conversion. You take your turn in the relay, at the second hour of the night, kneeling at the head of a bier 6 feet from a dead man for the first time in your life, and you find, to your surprise, that it is not frightening. The candle, the broad, weathered, absolutely still face above the grey habit, the psalms coming out of you in a steady quiet stream, your breath smoking, his not. It is not frightening. It is, and you test this word several times against the fact of the corpse, and it holds. It is dignified, in a total, achieved way that no deathbed you saw in the village, with its wailing and its terror, ever approached. These men rehearse death daily, at Compline, in the chapter's reminders, in the open graves that the rule tells them to keep before their eyes, and here is the result of the rehearsal. A house that can look straight at the thing every other institution in the world spends its energy not looking at. He's buried on the 3rd day, in the monks' cemetery east of the church, in snow to your knees, in a grave that the lay brothers took turns cutting through 2 feet of frozen ground with picks, and the sound of that digging, iron on frost, carried into the cloister for a whole day and stopped conversation nobody was having anyway. No coffin. A monk goes into the ground on a bare board in his habit, his hood drawn over his face by the abbot's own hand, and the community stands around the grave in the falling snow, 140 white figures gone whiter, and the lay brothers stand nearest, and Hamo, the young shepherd who drove the 90 down and lived, stands at the foot of the grave with the dog, because someone made the decision, and you would like to know who, that the dog should come, and the psalms go up into the snowfall, and the body goes down, and the first spadeful of frozen earth lands on the cloth with a sound you will hear again on certain nights for the rest of your life. And in chapter the next morning, Aelred speaks about it, and what he says you will spend years unpacking. He doesn't say Rievaulx is in glory, though he says that too briskly, as a thing too obvious to dwell on. What he dwells on is the sheep. He stands in the chapter house in the grey morning light, before a community still roar, and he says, "Consider what our brother did," because it will be easy, in a few years, to make it a story about the storm, and it was not about the storm. 51 ewes. Any man here can do the arithmetic of the world. 51 ewes against one man's life is a fool's trade. The world is not wrong about the arithmetic. The world is wrong about what was being counted. Leofwine did not weigh wool against blood. He was given a flock to keep, and he kept it. And when the keeping grew expensive, he did not renegotiate, because love does not renegotiate at nightfall. And that, brothers, is the entire rule, all of it. The bells and the fasts and the psalter. That is what it is all for. It is 40 years of practice at not renegotiating. He was rehearsing that night his whole life, and so are you. The Good Shepherd, the abbot says, and lets the sentence stand unfinished because every man in the room can finish it, lays down his life for the sheep. Then he says something quieter, and he says it looking at the novice's bench, at the row of you. And by now you know that when Aelred looks at that bench, he is looking at particular souls he's been briefed on, and you feel the look land. He says, "Some of you are asking the dark a question this winter. You are asking what all this costs and whether it is worth it, and I will not insult you by pretending the cost is small. It is everything. The rule takes everything. That is not its flaw, it is its definition. But you saw this week what a man looks like at the end of the road you are standing at the beginning of. You carried water for him. You sang him into the ground. Ask yourselves, not whether the road is hard, you know it is hard. Ask whether you have ever, anywhere in the world you came from, seen it lead anywhere better." Chapter ends. The community files out, and in the cloister, in the crowd and cover of the movement, Osbert's hand finds your sleeve. 2 novices, forbidden to speak, and he does not speak. He makes small, down by his side where only you can see it, the sign of the hands you were both taught in your first week, the one used at table and at work, the plainest word in the whole silent language, the sign for stay. Whether he means I will stay, or asking you stay, or both, you never find out, because the signs have no grammar for it, and it doesn't matter, because both are true, and Candlemas has come and gone. You realize days ago in the middle of the storm and the burial, and neither of you noticed, and he is still here, and so are you. Lent begins 10 days after the burial, and Lent in a Cistercian house is a thing that has to be described carefully, because from the outside it looks like the one season when nothing changes. The monks were already fasting, already silent, already sleeping on straw. What is left to give up? And the answer, it turns out, is the margin. The one meal moves to evening. The portions shrink. The reading lengthens. Each monk is given, in a ceremony at the start of the season, one book from the cupboard, his book, to be read entire slowly through the 40 days, and yours, chosen for you by Morus with what you suspect is malice aforethought, is the rule itself, which you have heard read aloud in fragments daily for a year, and never once met whole, and meeting it whole is like meeting the architect of a house you have been living in blind. It is so short. That is the first shock. The document that organises every minute of 140 lives, that has organised millions of lives across 6 centuries, is shorter than a market charter, plain as bread, and it keeps saying things you did not expect it to say. It says the abbot must adapt himself to many characters, coaxing one, rebuking another, so that he may not lose any of the flock. It says the sick are to be served as if they were Christ in person, and allowed meat and baths and grumbling about them forbidden. It says the old and the very young are to be treated with kindly consideration, always. It says tools of the monastery are to be handled like vessels of the altar, that a garden hoe is holy. And it says, in the chapter on the porter that the moment anyone knocks, the porter shall answer, "Thanks be to God," because an interruption is an arrival, and every arrival might be him. It calls itself in its last sentence a little rule for beginners. 15,000 mornings. A little rule for beginners. You read it through Lent at the pace of a man eating his one meal, and somewhere in those 40 days, without any single moment you could point to, the question Osbert whispered in the latrine passage, for what, stops being a question you're waiting to have answered, and becomes a question you're living inside of, which is a different thing, and the closest you ever come to an answer in words is this. The world you left is organised around getting. Every person in it, from the king in his wars to your brothers on their 2-ox gangs, is trying to get and to keep, and the fear of losing is the weather of their whole lives. This house is the one place you've ever heard of that is organised root and branch around the opposite motion. It is an engine built to give things up, and the men inside the engine, the old ones, the ones the machine has fully worked on, Morris, Serlo, Godric of the Lantern, are not crushed. That is the evidence your 1 year has gathered, and it refuses to go away. They are the least afraid people you've ever met. Whatever this life grinds off a man, fear seems to be part of it, and you have begun to suspect that fear was most of what you were. The thaw comes in March, and comes like an argument, the river rising brown and loud until its voice fills the cloister day and night, and the fish ponds have to be watched, and then the valley does the thing it does that no one warned you about, having only arrived here in spring yourself and been too terrified to see it. It detonates. Blackthorn first, white along every hedge like the snow refusing to leave, then the pastures greening almost audibly, then lambing, which swallows the lay brothers whole for a month, and the Granges send down news of the Count, and the Count is good, and 51 of the ewes that lamb that spring are alive because a man is dead, and the whole house knows which 51, and the wool of those particular sheep, someone says in chapter, should be tithed to the poor at the gate, and the abbot says no. All the wool serves God alike, and then does it anyway, quietly, through the almoner, because mercy inside the discipline works in both directions. The masons come back with the swallows. Suddenly the north side of the church is alive again, scaffolding climbing, the lodge ringing with iron on stone from prime to vespers, and the sound of building after a winter of wind and psalms is shockingly cheerful, and you are sent up onto the scaffolds now and again with the hod, because you have proved you can carry, and from the second stage of the scaffold one morning in April, you get the thing that every story of a place eventually owes you, and I will give it to you now, because you have earned it, the view. You come up the ladders with 40 pounds of mortar on your shoulder, and you step onto the boards at the level of the clerestory, higher than you have ever stood in your life, higher than anyone in your family has ever stood, and you set the hod down where the mason points, and you turn around, and the valley of the Rye is lying below you in the April light, like a page in one of the cupboard's books. The Abbey first, directly under you, and from above it discloses the secret that you have been living inside without seeing. It is not a building, it is a diagram. The great church, and the cloister square fitted to its flank, and the ranges fitted to the cloister, dormitory east, refectory south, lay brothers west, and the infirmary and the abbot's lodging and the guest hall trailing eastward, and the mill on its leat, and the ponds in their steps, and the walls holding the whole of it like two cupped hands, every stone of it placed by an idea, the idea in the little book you read through Lent, so that what you're looking down at is the rule, drawn at full scale on the floor of a Yorkshire valley in limestone and water. Then the valley, the river winking, the strips of the home fields, plough teams out, tiny, the oxen leaning into the collars, and white blossom running up the sides of the dale like smoke, and the sheep on the greening slopes scattered like dropped grain, and southward, where the valley opens, the smoke of Helmsley, 4 miles and one entire universe away, where your mother is this morning, alive and probably scolding someone, and northward and eastward the moor, brown, enormous, patient, with the last snow lying in its north-facing seams like the storm's signature, and up there somewhere, unmarked, the hollow where the peat hag stands, and the wind comes up the dale into your face smelling of water and turned earth and stone dust, and the mason beside you, a lay servant with a face like a walnut, follows your stare and says, in English, the only sentence he'll ever say to you, takes them all like that first time, lad. Mind the edge. You mind the edge. You go back down the ladders. But something has changed carry-weight inside you. The way a load changes when you get it seated right on the shoulder, because you have now seen the shape of the thing your days are bricks in, and a man who has seen the shape hauls differently. The year turns. That is the last movement of this story, and it is the truest one, so let it turn. Easter, and the church at the vigil packed and blazing, the new fire struck in the dark, the Exulter sung by Serlo in a voice you did not know he kept hidden. Summer, and the 2 meals and the haymaking, the whole community, choir and cowl and all, out in the meadows by obligation and ancient custom, the abbot himself raking, sunburned, laughing at something a lay brother says, and the smell of cut grass so enormous, so annihilating after a year of stone and wool and tallow that men stand still in it, the wool clip, and the Flemish buyer's cart at the gate, and the weighing, and the sums entered in the cellarer's roll that will build the next bay of the nave. The feast of St. Bernard Cistercians is not yet. Bernard is still alive, preaching a crusade this very year, a fact discussed gravely in chapter and dismissed by Morris in your hearing with one dry sentence. The more is crusade enough. Harvest, the nights lengthening, Michaelmas and the geese and the single meal returning like an old acquaintance, and the first frost putting its thumbprint on the cloister garth, and the year, incredibly, coming back around to the place where you entered this story, mid-December, Advent, the long night offices, the cold settling into the stones to be paid out with interest, and on the 18th of December in the year of our Lord 1148, the bell finds you in the dark at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you rise before it finishes ringing, and this time, this is the whole difference a year makes. This time your mind does not lag behind your body, protesting. It rises with it, quiet, already half in the Psalms. You make your profession the following autumn. That is beyond the edge of this night's story, but you should know it happens. The prostration before the altar, the singed candle, the vows of stability, obedience, conversion of life. The moment when the cowl of a professed monk of Rievaulx comes down over your head, and Helmsley's 3rd son ends, formally and forever, and Brother Edwin begins. Osbert makes his profession the same day. His cough never entirely leaves him, and his laughter never entirely leaves him either, and the two of them, the cough and the laughter, will be part of the sound of this house for another 40 years, because he becomes, in time, the cantor, and then the novice master, and the novices of the 1180s will be terrified of his hatchet face, and will never once suspect that in the winter of 1147 he stood in a latrine passage shaking, ready to run, held by nothing but a ploughboy's whispered word and later by a dead shepherd's arithmetic. You will be there for all of it. You vowed stability, and stability means this valley, these stones, this bell, until they carry you east of the church on a bare board. It is not a small life. That is the last correction this story has to make to the world's arithmetic. From outside, it looks like the smallest life imaginable. One valley, one routine, one grey habit, no wife, no land, no name in any chronicle. But you have been inside it now for the length of a winter's night, and you know what the walls know, that the men who chose this were not fleeing the world's difficulty, but its softness, that they built in the middle of the most violent century England ever suffered. Islands of order so durable that the anarchy broke around them like water around piers, that they fed the road's wreckage at their gates, kept the light of letters burning through the dark with their frost-bitten hands, invented half the agriculture and plumbing and timekeeping their world would run on, and did it all on beans, in silence, on 7 broken hours of sleep, and called it, without irony, without complaint. And this is the part that no soldier of any age has ever quite been able to explain to civilians about the life that nearly kills him, called it peace. So come back down now to where a story for sleep belongs, to a single evening, any evening, this one, the 18th of December, 1 year to the day since we found you on the pallet, the second winter of your life inside the walls. Vespers is sung, and the honey light dies out of the grey glass. Collation is read in the cloister briefly, everyone's breath smoking over the reader's voice, a page of Cassian about the quieting of the heart. The community stands a moment in the dark walk, while the last words settle and then moves. One soft shuffle of 140 pairs of shoes into the church for Compline. The last office of the day is short, and it never changes. That is its mercy and its meaning. The same 4 psalms, the same hymn, the same antiphon, every night of every year of every life in this house, so worn into every man that no light is needed, no book, the whole thing sung by heart into the blackness, and a monk who lives to be old will sing Compline upward of 20,000 times, and the words become less like language and more like breathing, and that is not a failure of attention, that is the design. The day's last office is a lullaby that 6 centuries of monks have been lowering each other into the dark with. You stand in your stall, your knees ache, the familiar dull ember. Your hands are folded into your sleeves, the cracked knuckle on the right hand reporting in, as it does. The boy from Pickering breathes on your left. The church around you is a black vastness going up into a blacker one. One lamp burning red by the altar like the last coal of the world's fire, and the voices rise, unhurried, unaccompanied, and the stone takes them and folds them together into that single voice that is no one's and everyone's. Qui habitat in adiutorio altissimi. He that dwelleth in the shelter of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Thou shalt not be afraid of the terror by night. His truth shall be thy shield, the terror by night. You know something about the terror by night now. You have carried water through it. You have heard the great bell toll into it for a man it could not save, and you have learned that the answer this house makes to the terror by night is not a wall and not a sword. It is this, 4 psalms, sung calmly in the dark by men who will be asleep in half an hour and awake again at 2. and have decided, all of them together, 15,000 mornings deep, not to be afraid. Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. The abbot's blessing. The hiss and patter of the holy water as you file past him at the door, a few cold drops finding your face like the first of a kindly rain. And then the great silence takes the house, and the community climbs the night stair by feel, and you lie down on your straw and your clothes in the long dark room, and pull the blanket to your chin, and the day releases you. Listen to what a monastery sounds like as it falls asleep. The straw ticking, settling in 11 other pallets, one by one going quiet. The dormitory shutter shifting in its frame when the wind leans on it. A small woody knock, patient, irregular. Osbert's breathing, 2 places down, roughened but even, slowing. Somewhere below, a door closed softly by the last officer of the day. The frost outside working on the valley with its small ticking sounds, tightening the puddles, stiffening the grass, silvering the 140 pairs of shoes worth of footprints in the cloister garth. And under all of it, holding all of it, the river, the Rye, running in the dark exactly as it ran before the monks came, exactly as it will run after them, the long soft breath of the valley itself. Your body begins its nightly settling, and you know its stages now the way you know the Psalter. The ache lifting out of the knees first, dissolving. The shoulders letting go of the hod and the pen. The hands, last of all, uncurling in your sleeves. The warmth of the blanket finally reaching the cracked knuckles, and the fingers going soft and heavy. Done, at last, for a few hours, with stone and rope and ink and bread. You are tired in the way this life makes a man tired, which is completely, cleanly, all the way through, a tiredness with no worry riding on top of it, because there is nothing to decide. Tomorrow is already written. The bell will ring at 2, and you will rise. And the psalms are the same psalms, and the stone is the same stone, and there is a strange, enormous freedom in it that you could never explain to your brothers, warm on their 2 ox gangs with their harvest to fear for. The freedom of a man who has given the whole weight of his life away to something that can carry it. Let the thoughts come now, and let them go, the way Maris taught you, like watching the river carry leaves. The lantern moving down the ranks at vigils, and the worn smooth handle. Let it go. The white fist of water at the trough and the burn of the towel. Let it go. The stone 41 paces, 42, the lodge doorway down. Let it go. The bread breaking, the click of spoons, one voice reading over a silent hall, the pen, the pelican of the wilderness, the sparrow alone upon the housetop, the abbot's half-second of attention, carried all day like a coal in a shell, the dog on the drift. The sign, small, down at Osbert's side, the plainest word in the language. Stay, let them all go. They will all be there in the morning. Everything in this life is there in the morning. Centuries will pass. You should know this. On the edge of sleep, because it is a good thing to fall asleep knowing. Centuries will pass, and the anarchy will end. Kings will come whose names you will never hear, and this house will grow until 650 men sleep inside its walls, and then dwindle, as all things dwindle, and one day, 400 years from tonight, men will come with orders and ledgers, and the bell will ring for the last time, and the lead will be stripped from the roofs, and the rain will be let in, and the valley will slowly take the Abbey back, ivy and jackdaws and silence of a different kind. But the walls will not fall. That is the strange grace of it. The church you hold stone for will stand, roofless, magnificent, its arches holding up nothing but Yorkshire sky. And people will come from countries that do not yet exist to walk in the grass of the nave, and they will stand where your stall stood in the green light and go quiet without knowing why. And some of them, the ones who stand still long enough, will swear they can almost hear it. The thing the stones spent 400 years being soaked in, 140 voices rising and falling in the dark at 2 a.m, and the words themselves will outlast even the walls. The psalms you sang tonight will be sung tonight, every tonight, somewhere on the earth, in every century between yours and the listeners, in monasteries and in bedrooms, by monks and by insomniacs, the same lines, "Thou shalt not be afraid of the terror by night." And 800 years from your straw pallet, a voice will be telling your day to people lying in warm beds in the dark, trying to fall asleep, which means that right now, in the strangest and truest way, you're not alone in this dormitory, and they're not alone in that dark, and some things do not change. The need for rest at the end of a long day does not change. The dark room, the settling breath, the day laid down. That does not change, so let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took Brother Edwin in the novices' dormitory at Rievaulx 878 winters ago, fully clothed under one blanket, with the frost furring the stones and the river running. Let the bell go quiet. It will ring again. It always rings again. Not now. Let the cold stay outside the blanket. Let the psalms sink from words into rhythm, from rhythm into breath. Let your hands uncurl. They have carried enough today. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. You're warm enough. You're safe enough. You have done enough. That's more than the world usually gives a person. That's enough. The river runs in the dark. The valley holds the house, and the house holds the silence, and the silence holds you. Sleep now. Good night.